I'm Chris. I'm a third year PhD student from the Centre for Trust, Peace and Social Relations. So I'm here to talk to you a bit about my research, not all of it, and that's currently entitled Evidencing the Emotion of Protest. Now before we get in, please, it's not working. Stress.
Click the right hand bit on the mouse.
Not working.
There we go.
Ah, right, okay. Before we get into it, first what I would like you to do is to just think about being at an event with lots of people. I do not mean a shopping centre or a crowded high street, when I'm actually talking about something like a festival, a sports event, or even a protest. So think about what can you see, what can you hear, and for my research, most importantly, how does it feel? So traditionally, what you're remembering feeling, or the feelings you're remembering, should I say, they would usually be said to be just what you're experiencing. And they're the result of internal physical processes interacting with cognitive ones, and vice versa. With regard to the situation, when groups and emotions are talked about in the research, it's always in regards to behaviour. So individuals are described as fusing with the crowd or losing themselves, and behaviour is believed to revert to a much more primitive emotional state. And this has led to many crowd research descriptions being about mobs, and there's a focus on the negative aspects, so things like violence. So going back to that memory that you were hopefully having, does that really make sense to you? Did you feel like you had lost yourself? Or even that you'd reverted to a more savage, primitive state? So, more recent research does actually challenge this idea of the loss of the individual. And evidence indicates that behaviour is the result of group membership and the group norms that are actually associated with that. Correspondingly, emotion as a behaviour is one of those group norms. And this is called group-based emotion. Back to this, last time I'll ask you to do this. Going back to that event that you were thinking about, when you were thinking about it, or at the time, did you even consider your membership with the group? Did you even think that there was one? Or was that shared emotional experience something else? So, even though there has been a move away from the irrational crowd and the mob mentality with the newer research, I'll be developing research further, and that's by making emotion the more central aspect of my research. So rather than it being a byproduct of the factors that I've talked about. And I'll be doing that by observing and documenting emotion in situ and over time, and bringing that together with people's personal accounts of their emotional experience in those events. Also, I'll be looking to determine if shared emotions require a shared identity. So I'll be looking at anti-Brexit demonstrations and Pride in London, because these are huge events where you're getting up to 1 million people. So they are from really diverse backgrounds, therefore they have really diverse group memberships. So the first two case studies were the anti-Brexit demonstrations. They were held in London last year. They were the Put It to the People march. That was before the first deadline for Brexit, and also the Final Say march, which was before the first extended deadline for Brexit. I'm sure you all know this story. So, with regard to the preliminary findings, at these demonstrations, the participants talked about emotions of hope, collective euphoria, and the festival-friendly feel of being there. They talked about, well, the majority spoke of them being peaceful marches without feelings of anger. This is actually despite them talking about more negative emotions, background emotions, leading up to the marches. And those were of grief and devastation. That was at the loss of their rights as a European, and also at the soul of the country. Also anger at the politicians and the media because of the divisions and the narratives they created around Brexit. Now the participants actually, they accounted for this shift from very negative to very positive emotions because they were with like-minded others in a safe space where they could actually be heard, which is something they felt they couldn't do outside of that. And also it was about having that opportunity to offer an alternative will of the people, and that was something that was exciting and it gave them hope for the future. Now at both protests, you've got various similar shared emotions across the group, and they support the idea of this need of a shared identity. So their shared desire probably parallels the idea of being a proud Remainer or being a proud European. So the next, or final, case study was that of Pride in London. So it's the largest gay pride event in the UK. Seemed like a good choice, I think. And that was held in July last year. It's a very different scenario in that it's actually a parade through London being watched by hundreds of thousands. The anti-Brexit demonstrations were marches through London made up of hundreds of thousands. So it's different. However, the participants described a very carnival atmosphere and there was feelings of shared love and freedom. They also spoke about how these emotions were shared with others in the groups they were with, but this extended out to the people that were actually watching them. The main difference was actually the idea, or when we asked about the idea of a shared identity. So they've spoken of shared emotions and feelings of solidarity, but the shared identity was not part of their experience. So the diversity within the parade and the LGBT plus community were actually suggested by them as reasons for the sharedness of emotion being so salient to them. So how does this actually do anything with the research out there? I think even these initial findings show that group emotion, it's fluid, it's dynamic. It shouldn't be restricted to an isolated instance. So the anti-Brexit demonstrations showed a multitude of emotions and how they changed before, during, after, and between marches. They didn't actually negate the idea of the importance or necessity of a shared identity, but I think the Pride parades actually do that. So group emotion was still shared, but participants didn't recognise themselves as one homogenous group. So I think what this indicates is that shared group emotions can still happen without a shared identity. So that means that the group-based emotions I spoke about aren't the only story. So an alternative concept is that of collective emotions, where co-presence and coordinated behaviour are important, but a shared identity isn't necessary. Oh, I should have done that earlier, sorry. So real-world impact. With regard to real-world impact, public protests are getting more frequent, they're getting larger across the globe. So I think an important thing is that public services can effectively deal with and work with the well-being of those attending. And I think this research demonstrates that large public processions are not a sight or an expectation of a riot waiting to happen, and even against a background of negative emotions because of unrest and socio-political issues and insecurity, they can actually still be a space for hope, community and positivity. So with that in mind, recognising and understanding the ongoing changeable nature of emotion means that crowd safety can be considered from a perspective of emotion rather than this current focus which we have, which is more in the moment about crowd management response. And they tend to typically be more aggressive, so water cannons as an example. I should have pressed these buttons earlier, I didn't. That is me done, so thank you for listening.